Welcome to the New Thinking for a New World podcast, where we explore the most pressing issues that are challenging and changing our societies. We are looking for new thinking and new solutions wherever we can find them. Listen as host Alan Stoga, the Talberg Foundation's chairman, challenges his guests for analysis, ideas and actions. Together, we can help make our world at least a bit better.
The Middle East is going through a transformation as significant as any since lines were drawn on a map 100 years ago, creating new countries and new borders. In the past 2 years, peace treaties have been signed between 4 Arab countries and Israel. New investment and trade relationships are emerging in a search for economic opportunity instead of ideological or religious domination. The threat of war between Shia and Sunni seems to be fading. Perhaps most importantly, there's a growing sense that local leaders, not those in Washington, London, Moscow, or elsewhere, can best define how people who actually live in the region ought to be governed. Almost by definition, Jordan, under the leadership of King Abdullah II, is playing a major role in trying to shape a new Middle East that will be defined not by conflict, but by prosperity. My guest today, Ambassador Dina Kawar, is both an observer and a participant in this transformation. She is currently Jordan's ambassador to the United States, having previously served as her country's ambassador to the United Nations, France, Portugal, the Vatican, and UNESCO. Welcome, Madame Ambassador.
Thank you, Alan. I'm so happy to be with you today. Thank you.
Let's start at the meta level. Do you think I'm exaggerating how profoundly the politics and the economics of the Middle East are in flux, or the positive potential of at least a lot of what's going on?
Well, if you look at the last 10 years in the Middle East, definitely 100 years after the Sykes-Picot arrangements, we're seeing a complete change and movement in the Middle East. And definitely the major players, some of the major players, if you want, not all of them, have gone off the political regional politics because of the situation. So, we had, if you see, we had the Iraqi war, which has made a country so important like Iraq, is now, going inwards and trying to put itself back on its feet. And the process is a long one because it's an internal process. We have the civil war in Syria, which is still, Syria is not is suspended from the Arab League, so it still has not resolved its own issues. We have the Yemen war. We have issues that are Libya that is in shambles. So basically what we're seeing is that the conflict now in the Middle East is internal to each country. And God knows that when conflicts are internal to each country and there's the dynamics that play within these countries, it's very complicated and very difficult. Also look at Lebanon, where they are now and where they're going. So definitely I agree with you that we are at a stage in our region where things are shifting. And at the same time, you refer to the Israeli-Arab normalization process with several countries, the economic flourish, and the same thing that's happening in all of the Gulf states. So we have some sort of happening, if you want, that is going on in the Middle East that is formidable for the region. And at the same time, we have those stalled, very complicated conflicts that need to be looked into. But what I can tell you, and that's my feeling, my own analysis, and here I'm speaking in my own name, is that definitely regional issues, for them to go further, have to be resolved regionally. And I think that's something that all of us in the Arab world feel, that we have to go on our own feet and try to find the solutions regionally, because we cannot wait for others from the outside to come in and solve these issues. But definitely for Jordan, we've always had this policy of, let's talk about prosperity, let's put our means and our funds and our money into economic growth. Let's try to look at issues, and Alan, issues in the world now do not know any borders. And in Jordan, His Majesty talks a lot about the need to look at issues that concern the climate, water challenges. God knows how much this is the future, and the scary part about water shortages, about food shortages, the refugees issues, and the movement of population among the Arab countries is something. The Syria war, we're the first country that has had to pay with Lebanon, of course, and Turkey. We've had 1.3 million Syrian refugees added to all the refugee counts that make Jordan, home to 30% refugees. So there are really very important issues that we need to look at as a region. And if we don't do that, it will be too late. And it's very hard to think that there are two speeds in the Middle East. One speed of countries that are, developing and going fast forward, and others that are stalling. We need to get to a point where we can find this dynamics of one helping the other for the good of all. And of course, among the conflicts that we mentioned Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, but we should not forget the Palestinian-Israeli problem and the issue of the Palestinian right to homeland. And that is something that needs to be solved and has to be solved before it's too late.
I want to talk about all of that in the time we have together today. But let's start with, in this changing environment, clearly there's been an intensification of Jordanian diplomacy. I have seen that King Abdullah was in Moscow. He's been in Washington. There have been recent agreements with the Emiratis and the Israelis on the one hand, with the Egyptians and Syrians and the Lebanese on the other hand, all that we want to talk about. But you get this sense that the Jordanian diplomatic motor is in overdrive.
Yeah.
What is Jordan trying to do?
It's very easy. I mean, I'll tell you one. There are several tracks, and one track that His Majesty is very keen on, which is developing the economic relations between us, Iraq, and Egypt. So we have this track that's ongoing. We have an economic agreement to create a free zone industrial, to create a pipeline between Iraq to Egypt going through Jordan. To do major projects. It is very important for us. Look, Alan, if you look at Jordan, in the last 10 years, we've been isolated, even in the last 20 years, because the Syria war has closed the borders with Syria, and we just had the refugee issue with all its complications. I'm happy to talk about it later. Iraq was our major economic partner, and when the war happened, we lost our major economic partner. With the West Bank, we managed recently to sign with the Israelis after many, many years to increase our exports to the West Bank. But this is a process. It needs time. The private sector needs to get involved. I mean, but there's this, well, we were in the middle, a little bit surrounded with no outposts, plus the refugees, plus the COVID, plus the economic, the economic flourishment is the private sector. The private sector, to get them in some place, they have to feel that they will gain. And that was a period when it's very complicated. So obviously these difficulties with the unemployment in Jordan, with the water shortages that we're worried about, we feel that we have to have a new outlook to the region. And so His Majesty wanted to work on this project between Iraq and Egypt and us. So we're doing that. And we're doing it very strongly. On another level, on Lebanon, there's a fear that something will happen to the country, to the sense where there'll be chaos. So His Majesty is always worried. In our diplomacy, we've helped he's tried to help the Lebanese army into getting them medication, food, staples, the things that make it live and alive. And of course, we're ready to send electricity. We're facilitating certain projects of gas transfer, if that goes, but it's from Egypt. So there's so many things that we're trying to help to keep Lebanon on its feet in waiting for some kind of resolution. On the normalization process, of course, we're part of it. We signed peace treaties after Egypt, so obviously ours that dates from a very long time. It has had its ups and downs, complications, because our geography dictates our policies, and the fact that the Palestinian-Israeli is in difficulty has has poured into Jordanians. So on that, we are willing to participate to regional economic projects that work on electricity, on water, on other issues, so that the benefits of this normalization and the peace treaty that we have comes into fruition. But the only thing we're saying is that all of that is good, but we need to. It cannot replace the Israeli-Palestinian track and the right for Palestinians to have their homeland. Whatever we do economically in the region is not enough if we do not address that.
To put that in context, Jordan signed its peace treaty with Israel in 1994 and has been a firm advocate for the Palestinians for decades.
Yes.
We have the Abraham Accords more recently, and certainly one of the major criticisms of those accords, fair or unfair, is that it left the Palestinians out of the conversation. You've already said a couple times that cannot be the case. But day-to-day diplomacy seems to be ignoring the Palestinians in the main.
I can only speak for my country, because it wouldn't be right for me to speak for others. I can tell you, for Jordanians and for Jordan and for His Majesty and for the government, the Palestinian issue is at the heart of all our diplomacy. Don't forget that the relationship between Jordan and Palestinian is a strong one for many reasons. We're neighbors. We have a huge number of Palestinian refugees in Jordan. The fabric of the Jordanian society is very much tied in with the Palestinian ones. There's intermarriages, families, everybody knows everybody. So I cannot say that for us it's been something that's put on the side. No, it's very much at the heart of it. But we would like to always work to see us going forward and to trying to find a solution. And we're always saying it's very important that we keep the idea of a two-state solution alive, because if the concept of a two-state solution goes away, it's a problem for the Palestinian. It's not fair for them. It's a problem for the region. But also, we say it will be one day a problem for the Israelis if they choose to go to the one-state solution, because eventually it will be a state that has Palestinians who do not have the same rights as Israelis, and that's not something I would imagine that a country like Israel would want to have. So we've always had the wisdom of looking ahead and doing and conducting our policies with a vision ahead of us, even if the inconveniences of the present are upon us. So it's a very difficult situation for us at all moments, because this issue is for us important and part of our internal issues. It's an internal matter. So I cannot say that for us it's forgotten, and I don't think that it would be right to say that we can just sweep the issue of Palestinian rights under the carpet and say one day, we forgot it, it's fine, let's go on. It cannot. It will come back, and it will be an issue very soon.
If you feel that the world lacks global leaders, please help support the Talberg Foundation programs. Individual donations are being accepted at talbergfoundation.org/donate. That's TALLBERG foundation.org/donate.
You've already mentioned a couple of times the recent agreement that Jordan, Israel, and the Emirates have developed in the energy sector. As I understand it, an Emirati firm is going to build a solar power plant, green energy in Jordan, from which Israel will buy electricity, and in turn, Jordan will buy water, will get an increased water supply from Israel through a new desalination plant. It's one of those deals that has been floating around forever, that has an enormous commercial logic, but also an enormous political logic. But it only got done now. What is it in the air that allows this kind of win-win-win to happen today?
But I hope that when First of all, it's an agreement that's going to be now negotiated. We signed the intention to go forward, but the negotiations are ongoing. Second of all, if something good happens, we shouldn't be upset and start to question why now, because we don't do the same when things that are more negative happening. But the whole idea is that for Jordan, the water shortage issue is a real national security issue. So we are working on many levels to make sure that this issue is solved. So we have this project that we're going to start to negotiate that will bring in some water. We've negotiated also with the Israelis to buy some water over the next few years. The details, are out there, and we are also working on building a conveyor system from the south, Red, to the Dead Sea to bring in water in order to feed in the Dead Sea, because the Dead Sea is losing a lot of its level of water every year. We say around 1 meter, which is catastrophic because we're losing the Dead Sea, and already it's in two pieces. And the danger of it lacking water is not only that, this is a source of water, of minerals. Economically, it's very important, but also the saltiness of the water will actually end up taking all the underground water because of the chemical reason that you know of. So we're doing this project, and we've been working on it for many years now, just because we needed to make sure that the water that comes from the Red Sea does not change the specificity of the water in the Dead Sea. So that's the third project that we're working on it. Now, is this a good thing that's happening? Yeah, it's very good. It's very important. But like I said, it's in the details. The negotiations are ongoing. And honestly, Jordan has been one of the countries that has worked a lot on making energy sector not just oil or gas dependent. We're working on solar, we're working on wind. When the Arab Spring started, Jordan had at that time all its gas important from Egypt, and the gas pipelines with Egypt broke down because it was attacked many times, and so there were gas interruptions. And of course, what is the most important thing for any country in terms of security? It's water and gas, energy and water and food, the three things that matter. They're not even, we cannot discuss these issues. Any country's safety depends on it. So we had to really rush into buying oil in the prices of the market prices. That was expensive, and it has affected our budgeting up till now. The debt that we are servicing comes from that period of energy. So that was a lesson that we needed to fix, to put back on track and say, this is it. We need to diversify all our energy resources, and one of the things is the solar energy. So when this idea came between the UAE and Israel, and the result is using solar energy, the investments of the UAE, which they actually are interested in doing, and getting us water, then it's a no-brainer in the sense of the usefulness of such a project. But again, we cannot say anything until we see that signed.
Absolutely. And I mentioned it only because it is the sort of interstate connection that will make this region more healthy in the long run. Let's go to Syria, another neighbor. You have been the country that has, in a sense, been the most affected by the Syrian civil war. You already mentioned the massive number of refugees that you have housed and cared for since the war began. But we're nearer the end than the beginning. The civil war isn't quite over, but it's all but over. And as you just said, the issue is what happens next? Where does this go? Obviously, it left a huge humanitarian disaster in its wake.
The thing is that if you try solving a problem the same way the first time, second time, third time, and you don't get results, then the third time it means there's a problem with you, And we have really suffered on many levels with the Syrian issue. And first of all, a country's borders have been stopped, and the access to Europe, to trade to the north has stopped. and here I'm talking about the Jordanian perspective, but of course it goes without saying, and I say it before I continue my discussion, that the major issue about the Syrian civil war is the humanitarian loss, the dispersion of a whole population, the population movement within Syria, those who left to Europe. We saw the sagas a few summers ago when people were just throwing their kids in boats and sending them and God knows what, those who were on the foot. Anyway, all of that, of course, I don't need to say it because people know it. But as far as Jordan is concerned, we have lost a neighbor of the north. And not only that, the refugee issue has been, for us, the humanitarian part, people take us for granted, every time there's a humanitarian refugee part, let's go. And the humanitarian part, we had the help and support of the international community, but not recently. I mean, after COVID, people had their fatigue, they had their own issues, they had their own economic issues. So we started getting less and less and less support from the international community. And where we are now, we're not in a good place, Alan. It's really taking up on our own resources, whether it's financial, economic, the unemployment high rate. And in spite of that, we really make sure that the refugees get schooling. It does create a lot of stress on our schooling and education system, the health the same way, and even in employment, we managed to give employment possibilities for 200,000 plus refugees. Now, that we all know, but what people don't know is what also has been a stress on us, other than the refugee issues, which is keeping the border, the northern border with Syria, which is around 367 kilometers, safe. It has put a lot of stress on our military and our army. We have the issue of drug dealing between the northern countries coming to Jordan, whether using it as a vehicle to go elsewhere or whether capturing Jordan as a market for the youth with the Captagon and all the complications that comes on our government and our military and our security forces to stop this very innovative cartel of drugs. We also have terrorism and issues on our northern border. Okay, it's not in our country, but it's on our borders, and that we have to fight. The presence of third parties also is becoming complicated. So this has to stop. And all we are saying is that the international community, the Arab League, needs to sit down and talk about it and try to find a way out and see how do we go forward. What do we do? We're not suggesting ourselves any solutions in specific, but we're just saying it's about time that we address this issue. It cannot go on like that forever. This is a country it's a huge country with a huge population that has suffered enormously, and we saw the results of all this immigration, whether being from Syria that went through Turkey or the Mediterranean, or whether the Afghanistan also into Europe. And we saw the movement. I mean, everybody's agreeing that the movements of the right wing and the nationalistic movement that has grown in Europe is also a result of this movement. I worked during my years at the UN into negotiating between countries some kind of reconciliation on the issue of refugees and migrations. Now, refugees was in the convention, but nobody were talking about migration. Refugees is a political issue. Migration is an economic issue, and that was never put forward on the table in the UN. And the world is divided. You look at Latin America and Central America; they're more concerned about the migration because most people leave for economic livelihood. The same with Eastern Asia. The refugee issue is more Mediterranean and so on. And then you have the Africans. Let's not forget the boats that were going through the Mediterranean. These are real issues that need to be addressed on a global level. And so just to go back to the Syria, we say, and then what? And that's the reasonable thing. But maybe, when you're suffering and when you're feeling the consequences of something, you end up advocating a solution more than others. Maybe for others they don't feel it, but we definitely are in the front line, along with the countries in the bordering Syria.
Well, it is the case. It is the case that the international community has a very tough time doing two things at once: And of course, since the collapse of Afghanistan, that's the refugee issue of the moment that is getting attention in terms of new monies, et cetera. But your point is well taken.
It was one of the issues that we always had when we were members of the Security Council, is when are we ever going to go into the thoughtfulness of prevention as opposed to reaction? And that has been ongoing for ages, because and you cannot blame anyone except the member states and the UN, because they are the ones who decide. The UN is as good as its members, and the fact that we've become overwhelmed with global issues, maybe one day we'll come back to the notion of let's sit down and try to take one by one.
And the COVID story, unfortunately, makes the point, is that rather than anticipate, it's been entirely reactive, and reactive not just to COVID, but to each wave of COVID. We don't know how to we're not letting ourselves get ahead of anything. I did want to shift finally back to the United States, because you are ambassador in Washington and have been in the States now for several years. The United States, whether or not the U.S. is withdrawing, air quotes on that word, from the Middle East, it is the current conventional wisdom. I don't think it's withdrawal as much as a refocusing, a resizing, a reshaping, but we could debate that. How do you see it?
And then this question is obviously the question of the moment. Is the U.S. withdrawing? Is it coming out? And I here, if you allow me, I'm going to speak in my own person, because this is some of the reflections that I have, and it does not in any way reflect any of my government's policies. Sometimes I keep thinking for families in the United States to send their kids far away and into wars and war zones. Maybe I can understand as a parent saying, what do we want with this, etc. And I can see that sometimes there's this anti-intervention or anti-being in that part of the world. Having said that, I think the United States has found a system, most recently, whether in Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan, where they have, military advisors, military presence that overlook any situation, any country. And I think with time, this is happening. They're overlooking, wanting to make sure things, but they have to work with the local. And that's, in some way, it's a wise way to look at it. The second thing and that's why many people didn't understand Afghanistan, the fact that, the small number had to leave, and in return we saw what we saw. Now, the other thing that I would say is that no matter how much the United States would say that they want to disengage from the Middle East, it won't ever be 100%, because the Middle East is still a central issue, because the interests that they have, whether it's with Israel, the Iranian presence, the Gulf states, the oil, the energy, and the proximity to Europe, the trade. I mean, 1,000,001 reasons that would not allow it. I think what let's say the ideal situation would be is that, again, eventually the regional countries and the powers who are very capable they know the issues better than others. The Arab population, whether in the Gulf, the Middle East, or North Africa, have some of the most brilliant, educated youth. And we have a powerful force that is incredible. There's nothing missing, really, except the wisdom of sitting together and saying, let's tackle one thing and another. And maybe, but that's the optimistic part in me, and I don't know if that's foolish or not, but maybe the fact that the US is disengaging or wanting to disengage might force us to come forward and take our own issues by our own hands and say, look, that's what we would like to do, and that's how we see our future. And believe me, if there's nothing missing in our area, nothing, neither the money, nor the means, nor the brains, nor the sun, which is good for energy, and nor the history, which makes our countries very interesting and something to preserve. So this is my only hope, that we would. I know that the United States policies has changed in the sense that they want to go and concentrate east and work, and that we're seeing. But maybe that's a reason for us to take our own issues by our own hands and go forward.
Let me end with a non-policy question. You've lived in the States now for a number of years. You've traveled extensively in the United States.
Yeah.
What's most impressed you, good, bad, or ugly?
I had this before COVID. I had the map of America.
There was life before COVID. I remember it.
I had the map of the United States, and I was saying I'm going to finish the 50th state in Hawaii for vacation before I leave. But I did visit around 27 states, and it's amazing how much. First of all, the minute you leave Washington, you realize there's a life outside there, because, in Washington, it's such a political environment, and you think this is it, but this is Washington, and it's a one industry town. So you go there and you realize how much. But what I would say, there's a lot of things to see in the United States, apart from the beauty of the country, which is amazing, the nature. You never see it anywhere in those big mountains, everything is big in America, and that's something that's amazing. I enjoyed visiting universities, and that's something that I admire totally, the academics and the way that Americans put the attention on their youth. They develop their energies, their skills, but also their personalities, and that I find amazing. The dynamism in the work, that there's so many things we can learn from the United States, and that's something that has always impressed me during my visits. And the diversity also in America is amazing, between the South, the North, and only when you do visit all these states, you understand that some of the early days of the U.S., the American founders, are still lingering around these ideas of, the state has to stay out of everything. I understood more American history and where it is now only by visiting these states. So I hope that, this coming year would allow me to finish my other states and that I can, enjoy knowing more.
Well, COVID is passing, inshallah.
I hope
you've got 23 states to go, so you better start traveling. That's a lot of travel.
Well, I manage. I'm good at that. So yeah, I have that on mind. But thank you, Anand, for hosting me. This was really lovely.
Thank you very much. I appreciated the conversation.
Thank you for joining us. Please rate our show on Apple Podcast and subscribe. Meanwhile, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or you can subscribe to our newsletter at talbergfoundation.org to learn more about our work. That's TALLBERG foundation.org. Thank you, and we'll be back again next week for another episode of Talberg's New Thinking for a New World. This podcast was brought to you through the generous support of SNF, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation.